The rain had just begun to fall when a young waitress froze outside the polished glass doors of one of the city's most powerful corporate headquarters. She had only come to deliver a forgotten lunch order, expecting nothing more than a quick signature before rushing back to her shift. Instead, one glance inside the executive office stopped her heartbeat. Hanging on the wall behind the billionaire's desk was a large framed portrait of an elderly man wearing his old mechanic's uniform. The tray slipped from her trembling hands as tears filled her eyes. Every memory she had buried for years came rushing back, and before she could stop herself, she cried out that shook the silent office. The man in the portrait was her father, the father who had disappeared nearly 20 years ago without leaving a single goodbye. If you believe kindness can change lives and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Moments Hub. Your support helps us continue bringing emotional stories that remind us all of the power of compassion. Emily Carter had never imagined that one ordinary delivery would completely change her life. At 24 years old, she worked double shifts at a neighborhood diner just to pay rent for the tiny apartment she shared with her younger brother. Their mother had passed away years earlier after a long illness, leaving Emily to become both sister and parent. Every dollar she earned disappeared into groceries, utility bills, and school expenses. Her own dreams of attending nursing school had quietly faded beneath responsibilities she never asked for. Yet despite everything, she smiled at every customer because she believed life eventually rewarded those who refused to become bitter. The billionaire whose office she had entered was Daniel Whitmore, founder of one of the country's largest engineering companies. Newspapers described him as brilliant but emotionally distant. Employees respected him but rarely saw him smile. Behind the polished image was a man carrying an invisible burden that no amount of success had erased. When he looked at Emily standing in tears beneath the portrait, something inside him shifted. The pain in her eyes looked painfully familiar. Emily struggled to explain herself. The portrait belonged to her father, Thomas Carter, a humble mechanic who had disappeared when she was only 6 years old. Police searches had ended without answers. Friends slowly stopped asking questions. Her family had been left with nothing but uncertainty and endless hope that one day he might return home. Seeing his face hanging proudly in the office of a billionaire made no sense at all. Daniel stared at the portrait for several silent moments before revealing a story he had never shared publicly. 25 years earlier, when he was a young engineer with almost no money, his old pickup truck had broken down outside a small repair garage. He had been traveling to what he believed was the most important interview of his life. Every mechanic nearby refused to help because he could not afford the repairs. Only one man, Thomas Carter, spent hours fixing the vehicle without charging a single dollar. Thomas simply smiled and told the struggling young engineer that someday, when life became kinder to him, he should help someone else without expecting anything in return. That simple act of generosity changed Daniel's future forever. He reached the interview on time, earned the opportunity that launched his career, and eventually built a billion-dollar company. Years later, after searching for the mechanic who had believed in him, Daniel discovered that Thomas had disappeared. Unable to repay the kindness directly, he placed Thomas's portrait in his office as a daily reminder that greatness begins with ordinary acts of compassion. Emily listened while tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, she realized her father had not vanished without leaving a legacy. Even though his family had suffered from his absence, his kindness had quietly transformed another person's entire future. Yet one question remained unanswered. Where had Thomas gone? Daniel became determined to solve the mystery. He assigned private investigators, reviewed decades-old records, and searched through forgotten files that no one had opened for years. Weeks passed with little progress until an elderly retired police officer remembered an accident involving an unidentified volunteer who had rescued several people after a bridge collapse. The volunteer had suffered severe injuries and lost his memory. Hospital records had been incomplete, and eventually the man had been transferred to a long-term care center under a different name. Daniel and Emily traveled together to the small rehabilitation facility several hours away. Emily's heart pounded as they walked through quiet hallways filled with elderly patients. Sitting peacefully in a garden was an aging man feeding birds from the palm of his hand. His hair had turned completely white, and time had carved deep lines across his face. Yet when Emily saw the familiar smile, she knew before anyone spoke a single word. It was her father. Thomas did not recognize her immediately. Years of memory loss had erased nearly every detail of his former life. Emily gently showed him an old family photograph she had carried inside her wallet since childhood. Slowly, fragments returned. Her mother's laughter. The tiny garage. A little girl riding on his shoulders. Tears filled the old man's eyes as forgotten memories broke through decades of darkness. Father and daughter embraced beneath the afternoon sunlight while nurses quietly wiped away their own tears. The reunion brought healing that neither money nor success could ever purchase. Daniel arranged the finest medical care available, hoping specialists could restore even more of Thomas's memories. Emily reduced her exhausting work schedule and finally enrolled in nursing school using a scholarship Daniel created in Thomas Carter's honor. The scholarship supported hard-working students who demonstrated compassion despite financial hardship, ensuring that Thomas's kindness would continue inspiring future generations. As months passed, Daniel himself began changing. For years he had focused almost entirely on expanding his business, believing success was measured by profits and achievements. Meeting Emily reminded him that true wealth is measured by lives touched, families reunited, and opportunities created for others. He established charitable programs for missing person investigations, family support services, and vocational scholarships for mechanics and healthcare workers. Employees noticed that the once reserved billionaire now visited community centers, hospitals, and schools, always carrying the same quiet humility he had first witnessed in Thomas decades earlier. Emily eventually graduated as a registered nurse. On the day she received her nursing pin, Thomas proudly stood beside her, his memory still imperfect but his love completely restored. Daniel sat in the front row, applauding not only the young nurse but also the remarkable chain of kindness that had begun with one free repair on a rainy afternoon many years before. None of them could have imagined that a forgotten lunch delivery would uncover a family long believed lost forever. If this story has touched your heart so far, please write in the comments, "Kindness always finds its way home." We'd love to read your thoughts and hear how acts of kindness have changed your own life. As Emily looked toward the future, she understood that life often hides its greatest miracles behind its deepest pain. Her father's disappearance had left years of sorrow, yet his compassion had quietly built bridges that connected strangers, restored hope, and ultimately reunited a family. Daniel discovered that the greatest investment he ever made was not in business but in honoring the goodness of someone who had once helped a struggling young man with no expectation of reward. Their lives became living proof that even the smallest act of kindness can travel farther than we ever imagine, returning years later in ways beyond our understanding. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you to never stop believing in hope, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to Moments Hub. Every interaction helps us continue sharing stories that inspire compassion, healing, and second chances. Sometimes, one story is all it takes to remind someone that hope is never truly lost.